One question about the risky ideas.
Yeah.
Because you suggest that probably it's better not to write ideas that are too risky, but sometimes researchers have those ideas. So do you think it would be better just to write ideas that are mild, and then when you have the grant, then work on the thing that you think is risky, or just give it a try?
It's difficult to give a general recommendation because in the end you'll see it's all about balancing this. You're actually asked to do the impossible. You're asked to provide an exciting idea which is completely new, but also provide assurance that it's feasible. So you're asked to do two things which are mutually exclusive, and you need to find the right balance. And that's what I said with the risky ideas. It's just an observation over the last few years that funding agencies tended to become more conservative in terms of funding risky ideas. And this is probably a reflection of that money got scarcer, and they want to spend money being sure that something gets produced. And so even though there is no general recommendation, I think if you have a risky idea and you know it's risky, explain that you're aware of the risk, explain what this idea could accomplish. It's important to show that this may be high risk, but it also, the outcome will be high gain. So we'll really have a fundamental understanding or, a fundamental result. And if you are aware of the risk, and for instance, a good idea is then to come up with the plan B, where I say, okay, so the best way probably, if you want to sell a risky idea, is sell the risky idea, show what it can accomplish, and say that you're aware that this is risky, and if this doesn't work, you have a plan B, which is usually, more modest and less ambitious. Because they will be sort of a good compromise, saying that, well, I'm aware of the risk, and if that fails, I still know what to do. I'm not going to be lost and go, oh God, it hasn't worked, what am I going to do now? The thing is important, you have to show them that you're in control. It's your project, you know what you're doing, you're in control, and if things fail, you have a backup. You're not just lost. That's what you basically have in every grant proposal. And these are things which you find in some, but not in all. So the structures may be slightly different, but this is sort of in generally how proposals look like. So a background state of the art, this is where you describe where the field stands, what the challenges are. And again, you typically have a paragraph or maybe a little bit more to write about a huge field. So you need to be very selective what you write. What you want to do in this section really is develop the background to your big question. You want to present, set the scene for your question, and you want to basically carve out what the big challenges are, where you then can come and say, if I ask this question, I can address these challenges. So don't try to cover everything, try to focus covering that what is important for your proposal and what helps you to make the case. Typically the next section would be something called aims or objectives, which is where you spell out your idea. This is the section where you have to say what you actually do. And again, this is typically something what has limited space. And here you do not write how you do it, you simply write what you want to achieve. So a good way to do it is, like as you've seen with the EU grant, one hypothesis and then broken down in 2, 3, 4 aims. If you get more than 5 aims, I would start worrying, because then it's usually getting too broad and too big. It's a good idea also when you've finished writing your grant, going back and check whether that what you have wrote really still fits the aims, because sometimes you see that there's nice aims and then you read the plan of work and then you say, well, that actually doesn't fit because you tend to get a bit lost. So make sure that your aims are really fitting to that what you said. Or sometimes actually it happens that while you write the plan of work, you have a brilliant idea and you may change an aim or have an additional aim. Next section is typically the work plan. This is usually the biggest section where I can write the most. Here you have to explain what you do, how you do it, and what results you expect. And then you also have to relate it back to your aims. So the simplest way to do it is simply structure it according to the aims. So if you have like 3 aims, you have 3 sections in the work plan. If you have 4 aims, you have 4 sections in the work plan. That's the simplest way to write it. For anything what is very risky or very essential for the project, have a backup plan. So if you, for instance, have one experiment in the first year which needs to work so that you can do the other 4 years, you need a backup plan in case that fails. If you have a risky experiment in year 5 where you say, okay, this would be icing on the cake when it works, that's okay. But critical points in the work plan you need to bolster. You need to say, okay, I'm aware of this risk, I can avoid this if it doesn't work because I have another plan how to achieve this. And in the work plan you also want to put in what infrastructure you need and how you get access to it. And importantly, sometimes you may need support letters from your host or from the institution, and start this in good time. So if the grant is due tomorrow and you write hectically in the evening at 12 o'clock discover you should have a support letter, it's too late. Also, if you include collaborations, and that's perfectly fine, but you need to explain why you need those collaborations. You need to explain what the role of the collaborator is, and also how the collaboration will be carried out, in particular if it's a long-distance collaboration. So if you collaborate with somebody in New Zealand, you have to say, well, how does this work? How do you communicate with this person? Are you planning to spend time there? Are you planning to invite that person? So you need to, it only needs to be a few sentences, but again, the principle is conveying to the reviewers that you have thought about all these different things. And you also may need to get support letters from your collaborators. Justification of resources is something what is pretty standard in bigger proposals. In smaller proposals, it may be just a small section or not there at all, but it's still a good idea to include it if you have space. So what you want to do, typically you're applying either money for staff or consumables or resources like computing. So for staff, for instance, if you say, I need a postdoc or a PhD student to do this, you go, well, yeah, but what is this guy going to do? So it is better to say what skills you want. So for instance, I need a PhD student who knows biochemistry, or I need a postdoc for computing. Consumables, a lot of it will be standard. So for instance, let's say if you have a typical molecular biology project, you don't need to explain every detail, but it is a good idea to explain all the costs which are non-standard. So for instance, if the student has to perform a lot of proteomics experiments with expensive reagents, then it's a good idea to say, I need 5K more consumables, because again, if you require facility access charges, these also need to be put in. And this is also what you see actually quite often, that people write, I'm going to do 20 gene array experiments, and simply forget to cost the money for it. So be aware that when you have written your work plan, go through it and really see, what do I need? If I say gene arrays, how many do I need, and how much does this cost, and I need to put the costs into the budget. Computers usually regarded as consumables because the depreciation period is only 3 years. So in most grants you can buy computers, but you need to put it in the consumable budget. There may be some exceptions, but this is the typical case. Also, don't forget to put in travel. So if you want to go to conferences or if you want to visit collaborators, and also publication costs. So if you publish in an open access journal, it's usually about 1,500 to 2,000 euros nowadays to do so. And it's also actually not a bad idea if you put in, like, you want to publish one paper per year. It shows that you're actually planning to publish something. Okay, so this is sort of what is pretty standard, and these are now the things which are non-standard. So what you see increasingly is that people wanted, or funding agencies wanted to write about impact, strategic relevance, and the scientist's reaction tends to be, so what, and ignore it. Don't do this. If a section is in there, don't ignore it. Whatever it is, and however exotic it may sound, you have to address it, because if you don't, there's a fair chance your proposal simply will drop out for formal reasons. So if you don't know what to write in a section, the first thing, get help from somebody who has written something, right? Ask a colleague or somebody who's experienced with grants, what should I write there? Also, you can be creative. So for instance, if you ask for what impact does this have, well, you can consider what impact does my research have on the field? What impact does it have for any commercial purposes? What impact does it have on student training or education, or on national research priorities, or on benefits for society? So, you always actually find something if you start thinking about it. But the best way is go to somebody who has experience or has written something and say, well, what should I write there? What you also, in particular in fellowship proposals, often find is that you are asked to provide a career development plan. And the main point is that this typically wants to know from you, how will this grant help your career? If we give you this grant, what will be the benefit? And of course, what they want to hear, that you will become a great researcher, or, so don't be modest in that part. It is another opportunity to convey your vision, and it's also another opportunity to sell yourself. So you can say, I am aspiring to become a group leader or a professor, or I want to be changing the field or invent a new technology. To some people this is a bit hard and may sound odd, if you have to praise yourself. But sort of try to imagine, if you get this grant in 5 years' time, where you are, how has this helped you? Sort of transport yourself into the future and say, okay, I've been really successful in this. So how has this changed my life, my career? And then write that down. This is what I want to be. This is what I want to become. Don't underestimate it, because again, in particular for fellowships, funding agencies want to invest in people who want success and who have ambition. So you have to show it. You also, a good idea is to state how you will achieve these aims. If you just say, I want to win the Nobel Prize, you probably better say how you're going to do this. Or if you want to become a lecturer or a group leader, it's a good idea to say, this is what I want to become, and in order to do this, I want to publish papers, I want to develop my skills in teaching, for instance, I want to develop my more technological skills, I want to develop skills in supervision, and this grant is going to help me because I have a student to supervise, so I learn supervisory skills, I learn mentoring skills, I want to write another grant proposal based on this result, so I'm going to learning how to get proposals, how to get funded. I'm going to participate in training courses and so forth. Write what you do, what helps you. to move along these ways. And again, it's a good idea if you're not sure what to write, just consult somebody, talk to somebody, or talk to career services, what to put in. It's in general, it's a good idea. If you're not sure about something, don't try to do everything on your own. Talk to people. Just, it's usually helpful. And most people are actually, if you ask them, most people actually will try to help you. Then sometimes you also have a chapter exploitation, which is simply about if that work is done, is there something economically relevant coming out? So for instance, a patent, a new technology, something what industry can use, or just something what contributes to any advances in society. We are back to the risk assessment. Some grants proposals will ask you specifically for a section on what the risks are. And this is a bit of a tricky section because, of course, you don't want to leave it blank because that looks a bit odd. But if you write, oh, this is risky, this is risky, this is risky, you may dig yourself a hole. So a good way to do it is simply structure it. So look at what are risks coming from the technology, for instance, a method which may not work. And so you say, this method is risky, so let's say I want to use advanced imaging, and this is risky because it hasn't been done a lot before. But if that doesn't work, I simply revert to conventional microscopy, and I will get results which help me achieve the aims. They may not be as spectacular, but I still can work. So you simply need a backup technology. If you have a technology risk, you need an alternative technology which will help you around it. You may have logistical risks, and these are actually tricky because a logistical risk is, for instance, if you have 3 aims and one strictly depends on the other. So if you fail in the first aim, you can't do aim 2 and 3. And that's really a problem because that will wreck your whole fellowship or your whole grant. So that means if you are in such a situation, you need to change the work plan so that you avoid these dependencies. And if it's on the end, it's fine, because then it's not, the further work is not dependent on it. But if you have something what is strictly dependent on A, B, C, you need to rearrange the work plan. Then there is organizational risks, which is basically infrastructure, that you may not be able to access the equipment which is necessary, and this is typically taken care of by support letters from the host or from the institution, which say, if so-and-so gets this grant, we will give him or her access to the lab space, to the instruments, and so forth. And then, of course, there's competitive risks. That means you may get scooped because somebody else does it faster or better than you. This is something what you really never can completely control. But again, it's something where the innovative aspect helps. So if you have an idea which is not mainstream but innovative, it's less likely that you get scooped. And if you specifically ask for it, so there may be some areas where it's more likely that you get scooped or not, but there you can say, okay, this is a competitive field, and if I may get scooped on this, but my research still adds novelty because of that. It's just simply, these are just guidelines. I'm not saying you need to write all this. This is just sort of a reminder what you can write. Preliminary results, supporting data, get as many in as possible and mention them at every opportunity. So this is the one thing where you can not get enough from. So if you have supporting data, put them in. Deliverables, milestones, Gantt charts. This shows that you can manage a project. So this is sort of how a grant structure usually looks like. And now we come more to the aesthetic bits. So a grant proposal should have an appealing design because it's first impressions that count. People make decisions very quickly. So there are psychological studies. If you meet somebody new, you make a decision within about 8 seconds whether you like the person or not. It's not different with a grant. If a reviewer picks up a grant, they make the gut feeling decision whether you like that or not comes very, very quickly. And it's better for you if this decision is positive. because it's very hard to reverse a negative feeling. So if the reviewer goes, oh God, they have to read the other 10 pages. This is very hard to rescue. If the reviewer goes, oh, this looks interesting, it's much better. So it's really the first pages which help you win or lose a proposal. So spend a bit time on making a good impression. So that, for instance, is again from an EU grant proposal which we got. And try to make the content clear, interesting, easy to read, the layout uncluttered. So see, you have 3 paragraphs, one is a picture, and actually pictures or schemes help a lot, because in order to explain that would have needed 3 pages. On a picture you don't get every detail, but you get that there's inputs, there's some iterative process, and there's something coming out at the end. So you get very quickly how this whole thing works. So working with schemes or pictures or workflows is a good idea. And again, in all grants, you have page limits or word limits, and you're constrained in how much you can write. What prompts many people to just use font 9, make the margins as wide as possible, and the spaces as small as possible, and then fill it all. And this is devastating to read as a reviewer. If you've spent 10 minutes and you're still at the first half of the first page, you get very frustrated. So even though you have limited space, try to make it uncluttered. Try to make it clear and easy to read. It helps getting copies of successful proposals. So if you think about writing a grant, try to find out whether anybody had written something like that, applied to that, and was successful. Also a good idea to find somebody who actually has been on review panels, because they can sort of advise you, read through it and say, well, this is good, this is bad, this needs to be clearer. And again, this means you need to edit. It's an iterative process, so that means you need to start early enough. And yeah, again, for the fellowship applications, just a few points, and they are pretty reiterating what they said, and this is on purpose just because it's important. So for fellowship applications, it's mainly you selling yourself. So you need to make sure that you mention your achievements, that you mention your future potential, and that you mention how exciting your science is. It's also actually sort of a psychological element that, in particular with fellowship applications, reviewers are looking for this enthusiasm. They want to fund people who are enthusiastic about what they are doing. So if you manage to get this through in your application, this will help a lot. A main question, of course, also will be, can he or she do it? And so you need to be supporting that in as many ways as possible, by track record, by previous experience, by preliminary data, or by there's usually not one single thing which conveys this. And this is why it's important to use all these little pieces, to stitch a case together. And as I've mentioned before, in principle, this is a huge balancing act, because you are asked to do completely contrary things. You are asked to be innovative, creative, and exciting. And on the other hand, you are being asked to be feasible, doable. On the one hand, it should be broad enough to any exciting question you ask has some breadth. There's not very, very focused questions are really exciting. But on the other hand, it's very important to be focused. So it's not easy to sort of give you a patent recipe, but just be aware of that you are in this tension. Neither the one extreme nor the other is right. What you want to be in the middle. And if I would have to pick a few things which are most important, it's innovative, so it needs to be new. It needs to be feasible, and it needs to be focused. And again, this being focused goes a long way to support your credibility and also to convince the granting agencies that their money is well invested. And this also plays into that what I mentioned, that my experience is that grant agencies have become more conservative in handing out their money. So they want to make sure that they get return for it. So just a few things at the end, and that's almost it. So read the instructions and read them again and do exactly what they say. So in particular, if you apply for EU grants or also SFI grants, if there is a formal error, the grant is out. It will not be even sent out for review. Nobody will read this. You may have spent months writing it and nobody will read it because you have chosen the wrong font. I'm not joking. If you choose the wrong font for an SFI grant, they don't read it. So make sure, read the instructions and obey them. And again, if you're not sure about some things or about some sections, ask somebody. Don't ignore them. Also very, very important, start in good time. So ideally you want to start about 1 year before the deadline, because it's an iterative process. You also want to have somebody who's experienced reading the proposal, and you want to get all the letters in support you need and all the collaboration letters you need. So start as early as possible. I know that rarely people start 1 year before the deadline, but bottom line is you're going to invest a lot of work in a grant proposal. And this work is gone regardless whether it's successful or whether it fails. So if you start early enough, that what you invest to make the grant better is maybe 10 or 20% of the work you spend writing it. But these 10 or 20% of time will get you the grant. You know, because the improvements are usually what makes it successful. So the first draft, unless you're very gifted or very experienced, really cuts it. But the second one, you know, where you've had feedback and input and have improved it, that is usually notches better. So try to start in good time.